welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. This week, we're talking about international travel during divorce. How do you get consent and how do you stay within the law to avoid doing anything that might backfire later on? A lot of people don't realize, but getting divorced in England and Wales, it takes at the very minimum 7 months. But in most cases, a lot more. So during that period, there's no agreements, you don't really know what the rules are. And that's when it gets really tricky, especially for expats who want to go home every once in a while. It can get really difficult to navigate those arrangements during that interim period. So to talk about the legalities of it all and how to deal with it in practice, I've invited Melanie Bataillard-Samuel, who founded MBS Law in 2022 to provide specialist divorce and family law advice to international families who are either based in England and Wales or abroad. She's got over 17 years experience as an English family lawyer, and Melanie's an expert in all areas of divorce and family law, with a particular emphasis on cross-border matters with France, which is how we know each other. It's great to have you here, Melanie.
Thank you for inviting me, Chloe. I'm glad that we finally managed to be able to do this. Thank you so much.
I'm really looking forward to picking your brain on this topic because it's a really big issue, especially for expats who want to go home regularly. And there's this period of uncertainty while the divorce is being finalized, where they don't really know what they can do and not do.
Yes, so, exactly.
For people who are in that kind of gray zone, what kind of legal documents do they need to have before they plan to travel internationally with their children? What kind of approval from the other parents, for example?
The answer is it really depends. It depends on the relationship between the parents. Are they able to co-parent in a way where they're able to speak to each other, they're able to reach agreements, or is it more of a difficult, fractious period and they're not quite sure how to speak to each other, what to do? So it really depends. First of all, you obviously need a passport or a travel document of some sort, obviously. Secondly, you need to understand where do the children live most of the time? Gone are the days where you could say, oh, I have primary care of the children, or the other parent has contact. It's more a matter of where do the children live most of the time, and who has the day-to-day care of them, if you will. So if you're the parent of the day-to-day care, the starting position from the court's view is the parent in the day-to-day care has the ability to travel with the children for up to a month in total in the whole year out of the jurisdiction without the other parent's specific agreement. And vice versa, the parent who doesn't have the primary care can have up to 2 weeks. Now, it's all very well saying that, but you also remember that you do need the other parent to know what's going on. And if you tell them, I'm going to, in my case, let's say you're going to France. I'm going to France with the kids and I'm leaving in 2 weeks' time and nothing you can do about it. That other parent has the right to go to the court and say, I don't agree with it for whatever reason. And that can hold things up. So although starting position is you can do what you want, really the thing is, no, you can't do what you want. You need to have the other parent's agreement. So you need to have the passport to be able to travel, have their agreement to be able to travel, if you will, to ensure smooth sailing. But also it depends on which country you're going to, because some countries require extra documents.
Yes.
And it can be a letter which is signed by the other parent. It can be proof that you are the parent, so birth certificates, marriage certificates. Once you're divorced, it can be a divorce certificate, particularly if you don't have the same surname anymore. So you kind of need to have all those documents sorted before you travel and make those inquiries. Odds are, if you're traveling to your home country, you might know the rules, because even if you're married and you're in a full marriage, so you're still married together and you're still living as a family unit, you would know that if you're traveling without the spouse, this might be an issue. So odds are you know what's going on. But if you're going somewhere on holiday, like, I don't know, let's say you're going to South Africa on holiday or something, you might not know that actually you need a document confirming that you're entitled to travel with the children. And some jurisdictions want, above all else, an order. But really, you need to speak to that jurisdiction to find out.
Yeah, so that's really the country you're traveling to. But from an England and Wales perspective, is there anything that's required in writing for the parent to be able to even leave the country with the children?
No, because in England, you don't need to have an order to co-parent your children. So you can separate, you can finalize your divorce. You don't need an order setting out how you care for your children. The English court's view is you care for your children as parents. So you make the decision what works best for you guys. And the court will only get involved if the parents cannot make an agreement. So really, it's whatever works out between the two of you, which is why I said at the beginning, it's really about, how well are you co-parenting with the other parent? How is the communication? Can you reach an agreement? Because if there's an agreement, nobody's going to ask a question about it. If you want that, that's fine. You can go. I would still always say to people, if you're a little bit uncomfortable about things, or if you're no longer using your married name, or if your travel documents are in your maiden name, that's for women. But for men, if you have a different surname to your children for whatever reason, or it's a hyphenated surname, you might want to bring with you some form of ID documents, i.e. your marriage certificate, your divorce certificate, your children's birth certificates, just to prove that there is that parental link between you. But in England, that's not really an issue, or England and Wales. It is more a matter of the country you're going to is going to be the issue.
You need to do your research ahead of time, really, to figure out what they expect you to bring along and represent.
Exactly, definitely.
And so you touched upon it a little bit, but say you can't agree. So you want to travel to a country that maybe your ex considers dangerous, or they're just trying to be difficult, whatever the motivation. What can they do to oppose you traveling? And what are the different options? I guess there's definitely a court-linked option, but what are the arrays of options they have at that stage?
It depends. Like, where are the children's passports? Often I have cases where the main hurdle is the passports are somewhere in the house. Let's say the couple is still living together whilst they're trying to sort things out, and the other parent gets a hold of the passports and hides them. That's the first issue. They can hide the passports. And so often I say to people, I'm like, make an agreement on this early on, or if you're really worried that the other person's going to be very difficult for no other reason they want to be difficult, maybe you get a hold of the passports first. Have already that control. So the first thing is they can withhold the passports, the travel documents. The second thing is, if you follow the rules and you'd be like, look, okay, I plan to go traveling. This is what I'd like to do. I'm giving you a heads up. I'm going to be going to this place, staying in this area. These are the contact details. These are my travel documents. You kind of give them all the information you should be giving them. So they know what's happening when you're traveling and all that. And they're not happy because you're going somewhere they don't trust, or it's a dangerous area, or there's a risk that you may never come back because there's no reciprocal arrangements, or they're not part of the Hague Convention, countries that have agreements. Then the other person can go to court and say, I don't want to travel. So I want what's called a prohibited steps order, preventing the children from leaving the jurisdiction for X, Y, and Z reason. Now, it's not a quick process, although there are urgent applications.
I was going to ask you, can it be done in time?
There are urgent applications. In my experience, they're not super fast. They normally take a couple of weeks. It used to be you could do them within 24 hours. Now it's not that fast. So you really need to have a plan, basically, if you're going to be the parent preventing the leaving the jurisdiction. So you can ask for prohibited steps order, and the court can say if they deem that this is a risk, then they can stop the children. So they can ask for the passports to be transferred to the parent. There can be an order saying the children are prohibited from leaving the jurisdiction. You might even be applying for what's called an all ports notice, which is basically a notice goes out to all the ports, so the airports, the harbors, whatever. On the edge, allowing basically the point where you're likely to leave the country. So it could be a harbor, it could be an airport or whatever, saying that if this passport for the children go through, then you have to block the children at that point, so they cannot exit the territory. So it's quite a strict thing, but it can be used if there's a real risk that someone's going to slip through the nets and take the children. Now, if it's a real urgency, then all ports notice can be done relatively quickly. But in my experience, for something like, I don't want the kids to go on holiday, you need a prohibited steps order, and they take a little bit of time. So you need to plan yourself. But if you're going to be making that application, it has to be legitimate. It can't just be, I don't want to go on holiday because I don't agree. It has to be, it's a danger. There's a real risk they won't come back. Things like that. You genuinely don't think this is in the children's best interest to be doing that. But if the other
It's not
parent
just
has
because you
really,
want to aggravate the other person.
yeah, no, exactly. And often it can be, because if you're going through a really stressful breakup, it can be a matter of, I don't trust that person. I've always trusted them in the past, but now I'm in a position where I don't trust them anymore. And so
Yeah.
I don't want this to happen. There's no reason. You just, in your gut, you just don't want them to go.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult, right? So I can see why sometimes that happens. And other times the ex is just being very difficult, and there's
Yeah.
nothing you can do about that. But it has to be justified application. And if the person who's leaving has taken all the proper steps and notified, etc., then the court's just going to let it happen. The court will say, well,
Okay.
there's no reason why this shouldn't happen. But yeah, there is some mechanism there in place to do that. And if it happens, you just have to engage with the process, basically.
Yeah. And what happens if the trip is planned before you even get the court hearing? Can they still go, or is the status quo remains?
It's difficult because if you're told, I'm leaving on this date, and the court says I can't see you until the day after,
Yeah.
there really isn't very much you can do. I mean, you can try for an all ports notice, but unless there is a court order saying the kids can't leave, that's
Yeah.
not going to happen. So it's risky, right? It's difficult. And if the kids do end up leaving the territory and it's just a holiday and they come back, then you can still go ahead with the hearing and just say, in the future, I want this to be dealt with differently. But if
Yeah.
they leave and they don't come back because they're being retained, it's kind of abduction. But abduction is you leave without telling anyone, basically. You hide them
Yeah.
in another country. Retention is kind of, you've taken them with you and you're supposed to bring them back, but you don't.
Yes.
So if the kids have been retained abroad, then you're hoping that they're in a country where there is a reciprocal agreement, or in other words, part of one of the Hague Convention. And then you can apply for the kids to be returned. And if it's one of those countries that's part of this, they will be returned.
Yeah. And would that be an argument actually for trying to block the travel if you can prove that it's a high conflict divorce and that they're going to a country where it would be very hard to retrieve the children?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. And that's often one of the main reasons why the court says, look, we're not comfortable with that happening, because, it's a risk.
Yeah. Okay. And so I know that you work a lot with international clients as well. What are the big mistakes you see people make because they don't realize it, they don't know what the law says?
One of the main ones is just making plans and getting ready to leave without involving the other parent, because their view is, the children live with me full time and therefore I can do what I want, or vice versa. Well, they don't live with me full time, but I'm their other parent, so therefore, why can't I do this? Or I've always done this in the past, why can't I do it now?
Yeah.
So that's a big no-no. And it's not that it's illegal or against the law or anything like that. It's just that if you're not engaging the other parent, you're raising the temperature. You're going to make it more difficult to negotiate with them in the future. You're not co-parenting properly. Two is, if you do end up at court, the court's view will be, if you struggle to co-parent, we're going to struggle to give you more responsibility in the sense that we will make the decisions for you. You also run the risk of, when somebody finds out, they just block everything anyway, because they're like, well, how can I trust this is happening if you haven't engaged with me? So one of the things is that they do it without engaging with the other. The other is not giving themselves enough time to plan it. So they'll be like, well, I always have them at Easter. So, Easter's, 3 weeks away. I'm doing it now. So what? Well, if you'd planned it in a bit more, and April's going to be Easter time, so I'm going to have this discussion in December. If something goes wrong, you have time to apply to the court for permission to leave or permission to prevent the children from leaving.
Yeah. And time to negotiate or find an agreement among you as well.
Exactly. Having those conversations and reassuring each other, etc.
Yeah.
So those are the really big things that I see all the time.
But for the parent who's the one who hasn't been informed and suddenly finds out their children are, off in Greece or God knows where, what can they do at that stage? Is there any way of bringing them back, of forcing them to come back, or can they do something when they return?
I mean, if it's a holiday and it's for a 2-week holiday or something, and there's no risk to the kids never coming back, let's say that they are actually going on holiday, I would say don't rush to court, because the court will just turn around and say to you, there's no risk to the children. You're at best, you're overreacting. At worst, you're being a very difficult parent.
Yeah.
I think the best thing to do is to wait for them to come back and then try to engage in negotiations, mediation, something where you talk about, look, I didn't like that. That didn't work with me. I didn't feel that I was involved in the decision-making process. I didn't know where they were, or, how would you like it if I did that to you, whatever. So basically set some ground rules, have a conversation about that. I think that's the best thing. If they do this repeatedly and it's yet another example of this having happened and now enough is enough, then I think it's fair to go to the court and say, we're able to co-parent and everything else, but this is really a struggle and I need to have something more formal. I want the court to intervene in regards to this. That's a possibility. I think that's quite a draconian measure, but if you have a parent that's constantly doing that and it's making it difficult, I often have cases where a parent does it repeatedly, and it means the other parent is constantly having to readjust their holidays, their plans to fit in around. And that's expensive, because if you're constantly having to cancel or rebook your plans or whatever because the other parents make decisions without you, that's really expensive, stressful. Nobody knows what's going on. And it's basically telling the other parent, you can do whatever you want and I'll always agree with it, which isn't how you co-parent, right? So, So I think those are the real things of, if you can't discuss it, you go to the court and ask for help. But if the children are taken out of the jurisdiction and they're not brought back, so for example, they're only supposed to be gone for a week, but actually it's the beginning of June or the beginning of July, let's say, and you've still got 2 months of summer holidays to go, then maybe go to court is a way of doing it and saying, I want the kids to be brought back.
It depends on the circumstances, really.
Yes, it really does. And this is the thing about England, is because England and Wales, the view is the parents are the best people to make a decision about the care of their children. The court is pretty hands off. Getting the court involved really becomes a situation where the court is like, we're going to get involved if you guys can't sort this out, sort of thing.
Yes. They want you to try to sort it out first.
Yeah, exactly.
But
and they'll encourage.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You were saying?
I was going to say, I always tell people there's a silver lining to all this uncertainty during the divorce itself, is that you're learning lessons of what you want to include either in your child arrangements order or in your parenting plan. You're going to see where the cracks are in your system and what you need to put a bit more structure around and a bit more boundaries. Yeah. So actually, it may tell you that, no, we need to warn each other 6 weeks ahead that we're traveling abroad, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of time, when occasionally I see clients where it is really a very difficult situation when one parent is really not thinking in the children's best interest, is maybe even a danger to them. But usually it's just people who are struggling to communicate and it's creating more and more difficulties. And often it's just a matter of saying to them, you need to go to a mediator or you need to be speaking to a third party like a divorce coach or a therapist to help get to grips of how do you deal with this person when no longer married to them or no longer in a relationship with them. How do you manage your expectations, their expectations, and how do you co-parent? And sometimes it's a matter of saying, well, okay, solicitors get involved. Solicitors are great because we know the law and we can be helpful. But the moment we get involved, we're racking up the temperature 100 degrees. We're making it very difficult for people to co-parent. Yeah.
So you touched earlier upon the Hague Convention. Can you explain a little bit for those who don't know what the Hague Convention is?
Yes, sorry.
So what happens if you take your children abroad and don't return them without your other parent knowing?
Yes, sorry. I was mentioning the Hague and I'm like, the Hague. And I was like, it's a city. What do you want me to do with it? So basically, there's a series of conventions that several countries have signed up to, which deal with, amongst other, lots of family issues, but amongst other things relevant for us here, how to deal with children if they're taken out of one country and brought to another. And so there are multiple Hague Conventions, but really when we say the Hague Convention, what we mean is if you take the children out of one country and you bring it to another, the two countries agree that if an application is made saying, please return them, the other country will agree to return that child to the originating country. So it basically means, help, somebody's kidnapped my kid. Can you bring it back to the original country so a decision can be made about perhaps where the children should live or who they should live with? Yeah. And so not all countries are signed up to that, but a lot are. I would definitely say before you travel, always double check what countries are signed up to what. If you're not sure, look at the FCO website, or the Foreign Commonwealth Office website, because that will have information about the countries you're visiting and what are the rights and links and what are the issues and how to protect yourself. So that's always a good starting point. And then definitely look at the consular website of the country you're going to see what, if you're part of the French consulate, what are they saying, the British consulate, what are they saying about what are the issues in regards to that. But let's say a child is taken out of England and Wales and is brought to a third country. Maybe it's part of the Hague Convention, maybe it's not. What do you do? So I think the first thing is to find out what country it is. what are the... Yeah, I mean, it sounds silly, but sometimes you think, oh, they've gone to France, but actually, no, it was France and they're Algeria now. So, you need to figure out which country they're in. Secondly, are there any conventions linked to that country? Are there any reciprocal agreements? If there are, great, you make an application. So you contact your courts, you're like, child's been abducted, I need to make an application to return the child. Application will be made, it'll be sent to that other country. And then the courts there will then say, oh yeah, okay, fine, well, the child needs to be repatriated. It's not quick. It's not a matter of, I need done tomorrow. It will take months. So you need to bide your time on that. Often people will wait because they'll be like, oh no, somebody will come back, they'll bring the child back, it'll be okay. It can take months. So start sooner rather than later to get the ball rolling. There are other steps you can take. You can, if you know what the country is, if you have a piece of paper or an order in place, you can just maybe contact the police in that area, or maybe contact the police here and then through them contact the police of that country.
Yeah.
Those are options. I've had cases in France where a complaint has been lodged with the police here, which has then been sent to the police out in France. And the police take it very seriously in France. And at the same time, proceedings were launched both in France and in England to repatriate the child. So it then became quite a big thing. Something to think about is that if the police get involved, you may find yourself having a criminal record in that country. So I had a case where linked to France, where there were proceedings in France and in England, but the police had been notified in both countries, and the police deal with it as a criminal offence to have kidnapped a child. And so effectively they were then having to deal with criminal proceedings in England as well as application to relocate the child. And in that situation, the parents had agreed, and then one person reneged on that agreement, and it just became very, very complex.
Yeah.
So how to think about that as well.
That's something to consider. Also, as well, the kind of the trauma for the children to have that kind of situation unfold, right? I mean, if you have your parent being arrested and the police come into your door, it's definitely not an ideal scenario for children. But it's important to consider that as well, I think, in that conversation. I've had cases with clients who had, sometimes inadvertently, without realizing, just gone on holiday back to France, for example, and said, well, now I'm going to stay here because actually I don't want to be in this marriage anymore, and I'm just going to stay here. And it's really backfired for them later on when it came to the divorce settlements and going to court, because it was a precedent of them misbehaving and breaking the law. So it's also something to consider in that case.
And it has a huge impact on, so it'll have minor impact on the separation of the money, minor impact on the divorce proceedings, but it'll have a huge impact on the children, because often if they've done that, it's because they desperately want to go back, because they want that support network, because maybe they've been offered a job out there, maybe it's cheaper to live out there, maybe they just have, they want to go back to their country of origin, maybe they always talked about it with their ex.
That's true as well.
And so therefore they just assume that it was okay. But the moment they've done that, if they then say to the court, but I now want to apply to relocate, the court will say, I'm not sure we can get that, because in England, it's all about, can the parents co-parent properly? And if there is a relocation, will the left behind parent maintain their relationship? But if you've gone and done that, the other person will argue, I don't trust them. I don't trust them to make the extra step I don't trust them to go over and above what they should be to support the relationship that will be more difficult. So you're basically shooting yourself in the foot doing that.
So is there, there's something we haven't touched upon, but as you know very well, in France, there's one of something that I think we should definitely have in England. I don't know why we don't, but the very first hearing after you file for divorce is to decide on interim measures and basically how things are going to work while the divorce unfolds. Now, we don't have that in England and Wales,
No.
But it doesn't prevent people from coming up with their own agreement, right? And drafting among themselves terms of operation during this transition period. Do you have any tips for people to try and do that, and how they can build something that's going to help work for them as well as possible, but also protect them if there's any issues later on?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of things to say. First is, if you're a French person listening to this and you think, I've started court proceedings, I've got divorce ongoing, it'll be fine, it'll all, everything will be sorted out. No, in England, everything is separate. Divorce, finances, children, everything's separate. And the divorce courts, the finance courts don't want to know about the children. So it's up to the parents to sit down and have that conversation. So my tip is have that conversation. And if you can, try to complete a parenting plan. So a lot of people talk about parenting plans like it's something formal the court gives you. It's not. It can be whatever it is you want it to be. But there are some really good template parenting plans out there. I know our Family Wizard have done one that's really good. But there's a few others. CAFCAS have some, and there are some other of that. It's just to give you an idea of what it is you should be looking at. Sometimes it's helpful to speak to a solicitor, just to have an idea of what should be included in that if you're not sure. I know that some divorce coaches, Chloe, are happy to sit there and go through and what are the thoughts to think about, what should you be looking at. And if you're really struggling to negotiate those terms, you could be using a mediator to help you in that negotiation process, because the mediator can just effectively deal with that and getting you guys, the parent, to talk about what should be in the parenting plan. Now, parenting plans aren't enforceable. They're not like orders, but at least you've had that conversation and you know where each of you stand and what are your hard lines and what importantly works for the kids and what doesn't work, because you can involve the kids in it. What do the kids want? Absolutely. How does that work for them? I've had people saying, we really want to engage in like a nesting scenario whereby the children stay in the home and we move between homes. And I can't think of anything worse than having to uproot myself every week. But some parents think this is absolutely amazing. Yeah, some people think this is absolutely amazing. The kids are super settled, they're very happy, and it works for us. Well, then fine, do that. If that's what you want, set it out on your parenting plan. That's absolutely great if that's what works for you, but you have to have that conversation. Yeah. If you want something a bit more formal, you can have solicitors draft some sort of heads of agreement. I really don't like doing this because I think if you're able to reach an agreement, why do you need me to sign off? It's not going to change anything, right? It's not going to change anything. And then obviously the other thing is to go to court. Now, even if you reach an agreement and you turn it into what's called a consent order, so it's an agreement by consent between the parents that the court will approve. So even if you have a parenting plan and you want to be turned into an order, the court may not agree to turn it into an order. They may turn around and say, we're not doing this. If you really want to get it into an order by consent because you travel around a lot because you're an international family, or one of you will be spending a lot of time abroad and you want the children to travel back and forth, or you need a document because in your country of origin, this is what you need to prove that the divorce is being finalized. So I've had a case in the Czech Republic where we needed to have a consent order in place for the divorce to be finalized in the Czech Republic. It sounds silly, but they wouldn't finalize it without proof that the court had made a decision on the kids. You can then ask the court to get involved, but a word of warning, the court is so backlogged, it can take them 6 months to even look at this. So stick your parenting plan if you can.
Divorce anyway.
Yeah. So start with your parenting plan, and if you can make that work, just don't worry about anything else.
So you mentioned it's not legally binding, a parenting plan, but would it be still taken into account by the court later on if you do end up in court proceedings? Okay.
Definitely.
So it does set a precedent.
Yes, and because it shows that you've had thought about this, you've had a discussion, particularly if you can show it was a discussion, maybe you went to a mediator, you reached an agreement on this, maybe solicitors were involved in helping you draft it, all these things show the court that actually we knew what we were doing and we wanted this to work. So the court will give it a lot of weight, but if the reason you're at court is because some parts of it don't work, actually, the nesting thing really doesn't work because you feel like so and so is always going through your underwear drawer when they're visiting the house or whatever. I'm being silly, but it doesn't work. The court might say, I get the parenting plan, but clearly it's not working, so we have to make another decision on a specific point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. I like to wrap up with this kind of a summary. So what would be your 3 tips to people who are getting divorced but want to make sure they can travel internationally without too much conflict?
I think point number 1 is communication. You need to be able to communicate with your other parent. So you need to co-parent properly. You need to have a conversation about it. You need to let them know what's going on, and you need to let them know what you want and what's happening. So the whole information exchange. Tip number 2 is don't leave it to the last minute. Plan in advance. Give yourself as much time as possible. I always say to my clients, if you know the school diary, you know when the holidays are, plan in advance, as far in advance as you can, because things happen. You might need to really be negotiating on some points. And the third one is don't be afraid to seek help from third parties. Don't be afraid to go to a mediator. Don't be afraid to seek advice from a solicitor. You don't have to hire them to do everything for you, but speak to them. Don't be afraid to have support from a divorce coach or a therapist, someone who can help you, maybe help you understand how to negotiate or to co-parent. So I think those are my 3 things: communication, planning, and seeking help from third parties when you need it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the second one, particularly, it rings true to me, particularly having had the experience of divorcing and co-parenting. You can't necessarily operate the way you did when you were married and you book a holiday a week ahead. There is unfortunately more constraint because you need to make sure that the other parent is involved and that you can give them an opportunity to contest or have another opinion. And so it does require a little bit more anticipation with regards to holiday planning. Yeah,
definitely. And also, you're less likely to be disappointed if you're giving yourself enough time to change your mind. If your heart's set on going to Japan, but actually you can't do that, well, maybe actually after second thoughts, Germany's pretty cool. I don't.
And then you don't lose money with flights that you have to cancel or change as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie. This was all really, really helpful. I will put the contacts for MBS Family Law in the episode description so people can reach out to you if they feel they need support, if they have any questions, and in general, if they're struggling with this kind of issue. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chloe. Thank you, Chloe.